Hi guys, hope you're all keeping well. Welcome back to my channel. On my podcast this week, I have got the man who does the Lineout Lab channel on YouTube. I'll leave a link to that in the box below. He is a rugby coach. He's worked with the Ireland women's team. He's worked with the Leinster player development side of things as well. And he specialises in many areas of the game, most including the line-out, attack, and many other areas. But we're just going to have a chat about the general way that we think the game of rugby is right now and going forward, and just giving our thoughts. So, welcome to the podcast, Peter O'Donnell. How are you doing, Peter?
Hey Carl, how's things? Yeah, thanks for having me on. Looking forward to the next while and discussing all things rugby.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, so your history of coaching, that, seen some of your videos, mainly line out you focus on, like, so just with where the line it has developed over the last number of decades or so. Of course, I think, I'm maybe a bit too young, but you might remember the days when it used to be just a case of you threw it in and they all had an arm wrestle, and then now it's gone into the days of lifting in the last 20 years or so. So yeah, how do you think that has gone in terms of development, for better and for worse?
Yeah, like I think it's really interesting. I think as you said there, I'm a coach who I have a real passion for the lineup, but I love coaching all areas of the game, and I definitely think I think there's a niche around the line out in terms of being a specialist coach around that, and also just around throwing as well, which is probably the other thing which that's what I suppose got my. When I started working with the Irish women a few years ago, that was kind of how I started, and then became skills coach, assistant coach, and kind of delved into all sorts of areas. But yeah, I think when I look at the lineup, I actually remember back as a player when the game just turned pro. I was just in school, and then we knew we were going to be doing lifting the next year when they changed the laws, and that was something really exciting to look forward to. And then I think it was only 13 or 14 at the time, and then they then changed the rules, so you couldn't lift until you were under 15 in Ireland anyway. So I think with lifting, it definitely tidied up what the lineups used to be like, and I think for a long time you'd have to do a lot really wrong to kind of lose your line out. I think what you've seen in the last kind of couple of years, and I'm sure we're probably talking now as well, is that defenses I think have gotten a lot better, and I think that's obviously as much knowing trends of where teams like to throw and who they like to throw to, but just generally I think teams work a lot more on their defensive stuff. So I think that's been a really interesting trend over the last couple of seasons.
Yeah, definitely. And then I think that's also maybe led to a few cheeky obstructions now and then, especially around setting up a drive-in mall. Can be somewhat argued sometimes, like, because I think with how the laws constantly change, there's always some debate as to what counts as an obstruction or not. But
Yeah.
yeah, but also, like, one of my main problems personally with the modern lineout is, I think, like, the way the gap is being refereed, as you know, obviously it has to be a meter gap with the throwers, but I just think, like, sometimes that's not refereed as much, like, especially with defenses. Sometimes you see them sort of creeping up a bit over the meter gap to try and get an advantage, and so sometimes as well, I think it's skeptical of how it's refereed when they're going to ground, because players aren't, as you know, they're not allowed to actually go into any competition until the line-out's over. So, that's what you think of that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think you're right. I think the gap doesn't really it doesn't get it's actually a really difficult thing to do. I think to not, once the ball is there to be contested, very difficult not to close the gap, because naturally you're going to go to compete for the ball. So there's kind of two sides of it. I kind of think when you talk about the gap, like, there's obviously before the ball's thrown. So yeah, I do think you're right. Defense is definitely creep, and I think referees are kind of onto that. To a degree, some referees aren't. But yeah, the gap, I think, can be. Look, I think we want it to be a contest for possession, and when there was no lifting, we wanted a contest. When and obviously you're naturally going to come together to compete for the ball. So I think it's actually a very difficult thing to eradicate or to not have, because naturally you're going to go for it. So, yeah, I think definitely the gap beforehand could be a little bit better at times, and actually for a thrower and from an attacking perspective, I think throwing late is a really good skill. Where you might actually have to take a step on to your side to give yourself a gap, and then the ball's going in, really, from an attacking team's perspective. But yeah, I think I think you probably saw a couple of years ago as well how defending. What used to bother me was how the defending pods would just throw someone over onto the attacking team, and that would really disrupt them all. And that was quite dangerous, to be honest with you. And you don't see that too much anymore. You still see it sometimes.
Yeah.
I guess what you probably see a lot now, and it still get kind of penalised, is obviously hands on the jumper as they're coming down. So from a safety perspective, that's probably certainly for the younger generations and the younger teams. That's probably something that probably coaches and referees need to be mindful of.
Mm-hmm.
But I suppose the one thing that bothers me about the line out really is actually just off the line out is that it's actually the back lines that are 10 meters, are so-called 10 meters, and that how they encroach, the defense is always encroach. And so what could be a 20-meter gap, and assuming that you've got a good 10 who's going to attack the ball and run onto the ball, you know, in theory, you probably should have maybe 16 meters of space. If you take a step or two to run onto it, and they take a step or two to run onto it as you catch it.
Yeah.
Maybe 16 meters, 15 meters of space, maybe a little bit less than that, maybe sometimes something less than 5 meters of space by the time you actually catch it sometimes. So, yeah, that probably bothers me more about the line out, how it's refereed just off it as that defending team. But yeah, sorry, go on. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say I agree with you, because I think there was one case in the Six Nations. Remember that? Was it the Damien Penaud try for France against England, where Gael Ficou just charged forward, and there's a lot of dubious as to whether he was 10 meters back when the line out was over, because he just kind of charged forward. And there's, there's a couple of other referees I had debates with about that, and I was kind of thinking, I don't think. So I don't think he was fully in law there. But I mean, yeah, from a personal point of view, the gap is something that kind of bothers me a bit, because I do see sometimes referees at the start of a game, as should be generally a referee's prerogative at the start, to make sure you've got the meter gap, you're setting it out. And you still see most referees do that, but sometimes after they've set it, they just kind of ignore it. I mean, and again, as you say, with defenses creeping up, and I get where you're coming from. It's a kind of instinctive thing, but I think also if referees were hotter on it and just said, like, look, sort of you keep the gap, or I'm giving you a free kick, and then after free kicks, obviously it turns into a penalty. So that would be, so that's something I think is more like a referee's trying to be hotter on, and then teams would be like, okay, we need to make sure we're, smart here. And then I think it would be, that's what.
One thing I definitely look to coaches, I don't really like the idea of, again, it's kind of a throwing in mind, is that I don't really want the pod, if there's a bit of movement, let's say, I don't want that pod to be like jumping in the middle of the line. I don't mind if they're, they might be slightly in, because obviously with a bit of movement you might be slightly in, but you certainly want that jumper kind of reaching to compete for the ball. I definitely much rather that than a guy who's quite straight and taking it here. So I think you've a lot more margin for error if your throw is in any way off by, even just a little bit. You got you have a much higher margin of error if you kind of maintain your line of where you are and you're kind of reaching in to go for the ball with your hands, and that's going to look straighter to a referee, or at least it's competing, and it's less likely to be called crooked, even if you have to reach for it a bit. Whereas if you actually are jumping in the line out and you have to stay where you are, or it's in any way off, or maybe it's kind of going towards your outside shoulder, or just in between your, the midline of your head and the outside shoulder, the referee is more likely going to call that crooked. So I think for that consistency, I think that's important from a jumping pod perspective on the attacking team. But
yeah, absolutely. And well, that's to say, it's generally the way. I think referees have the directive, even though the ball does technically, I know with now the hookers, because they can take a step towards their own team, the ball still has to be technically straight from the thrower's hand. And sometimes it can just end up going straight into the jumper's chest. It just goes straight, if you know what I mean, just directly towards the chest, and they just catch it. And then there's dubious how straight that is. Obviously, if they are taking it from the side that's outside the line, now that's just clearly not straight. But sort of it's just kind of I think sometimes with those throws that go just straight towards the jumper in that kind of fashion can be up for debate. But sort of that's. But I mean, I think with regards to getting on with the game as well, because most referees don't just want to be nippy picky of every throw that goes in. So
yeah, exactly. 100%.
But yeah, that's just my thoughts there, really. Because but no, I mean, again, we talk about pods. You're saying about defensive pods as well, with regards to coming down to get set up for a driving maul. Do you mean?
Oh, when I was saying, no, so what sometimes you see is a jumper will go up and compete, and what the the defending pod or lifters will do is they'll basically throw him onto the attacking side.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
he'll land as somebody's about to rip the ball, or
Mhm.
somebody's maybe coming in this, in the second line, and so he just disrupts it basically. He just kills them all there and then,
Mhm.
as a weapon. So you don't see it too much, to be fair.
Yeah,
Now it was really prevalent there a few years ago. You see it occasionally, but
yeah.
yeah,
I
I
mean,
think referees have been on that.
yeah, it happened a couple. I remember it happening a couple of times in the Ireland France game. I think that was maybe Paul O'Connell's coaching coming into it a little bit there. But I mean, the fact is they were just so obviously the Ireland were just so obviously chucking the ball to their jumpers towards the French line. It's just again, just it's a safety thing as well. You just
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, I
exactly.
wouldn't have a problem if a player like did just reach the hand across to try and take it and just try to tap it back, even if their hand did like slightly go towards the opposition a bit more.
Yeah,
But as long as obviously they're not grabbing on the opponent's jersey, or they're not sort of manhandling the opponent anyway, they're actually physically going for the ball. Like I personally don't see a big problem with that again.
yeah,
But as long as safety parameters are taken into
yeah,
consideration.
yeah, 100%. Yeah, no, I think certainly with the younger age groups, you wouldn't want to see that, that coach, let's say, it's probably something. It's like these. It's like a lot of things. You probably see it come back into the game in time. So it's a bit like the breakdown. How obviously there's been a big focus around, you know, square entries. Getting over. Well, obviously you generally want to be targeting over the ball for a lot of the times, or where the threats are coming from. Generally tends to be you want to protect that ball as around the breakdown. So, but now you might get away with. A few years ago, you weren't able to like do deep cleans 5 meters past the ruck. Now you might be more likely to get away with that because referees are still looking at the entry. So
Mhm.
similar with the line out, you might have that you might see that come back into the game in a few years' time. So because referees, it's not a hot agenda on the referees that season. So yeah, it's but yeah,
Yeah,
you wouldn't. I don't think it's something you should really coach at underage level. From
yeah.
purely perspective.
Yeah. So I mean, that's because it's the same in Scotland as well. I think it's up till under 50. It's only over under 15s that they actually do the coaching of the lifting.
Mm.
Really. So it's I mean, and I think generally agree. I think that's safe enough. I mean, I've refereed a few games under 15s where players have obviously understand their kids, they're still learning, like they have been a bit cheeky and tried to
Yeah,
lift
yeah,
their own man up in that kind of way, and you kind of have to obviously make sure you put them in their place there. But yeah, it's
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's true. It's a
mm-hmm,
good point.
yeah. But no, I mean also one of the tactics notice, I think it's like in the last 5-10 years or so, especially at the high level of the game, when it comes to defensive lineouts, you generally see in opponents' 22s when they're obviously going to set up for a driving maul. The defensive teams don't bother competing because they're just all getting ready to
Yeah,
pile in more or
yeah,
less. I mean, I personally have like a little. This is maybe just a personal opinion. A little bit of a gripe with that. Like, I kind of think, the defenders, like if you want, you can't really play rugby without the ball. Wouldn't you want, and especially in that area, when you want to try and get the ball back. But again, with the way the game's gone, I understand there's a lot more focus on trying to just make sure you stop that driving maul, especially if you're maybe a pack that thinks they can get an advantage there with the power game. A defensive pack. I mean,
yeah. I think yeah, it's really interesting because I think there's so many great things going on with the line at the moment that I really enjoy watching, and defending teams are a lot better defensively, but I think there's also an element of them having to be pragmatic because if you in any way get your timing off or you make a misread, um, and you go up against a team, even if they might be smaller than you, but you're 5 yards from your line, they're more likely to score. The stats are, going back to using a game as a reference. The Ireland Wales game, first game of the Six Nations, when Billy Burns went for basically a penalty kick last play of the game. It was in injury. It was in
yeah,
additional time, and the clock was over, and he kicks it dead. He was trying to get as close to the 5 meters as possible, and rather than going for 10 meters, because the stats at the moment. Not that I'm a stats heavy person or heavily focused. Obviously, they are important and they have a place, but you have a much higher percentage of scoring if you have a line at the 5 meter line than you would from the 10 meters out. So yeah, I think teams, if they in any way get there, if they go up defensively and they miss it, then there's a much higher chance the teams are going to score from a maul or from soon after. So yeah, if you stay down, maybe you can kill it. You're still under pressure, in terms of percentages.
Mm-hmm.
But you might have, at least you might have a better chance. But of staying, of keeping them out, from keeping the attacking team out. So yeah, I think it's kind of come down to the game. I think you've got to kind of play the scenario. So you might be able to set up a trap where you might actually jump somewhere, even though you might look like you're not going to jump.
Mm-hmm.
Or you might defend like a bit like what France were doing there at one stage. They had a really interesting setup, which they did in the autumn Six Nations, and I think they used it once or twice as well. Since they would set up with their front row pretty much. They'd set up like ideally that the attacking team would have to throw to the front, and then they were just going to kill you with their front row basically, and then everyone else coming in adding weight from kind of on an angle to drive you towards the touchline. And so if you want to throw to the middle and the back, that's fine. Go there. We're gonna compete, and if you want to win the ball at the front, then we're gonna absolutely smash you. And which they did, and in the autumn, the first line that they did, and 5 meters out. So I think you can kind of set up scenarios like that from your defensive strategy, and then you can also set up traps where you look like you're not going to go up, but you can still go up. So yeah, I think it's really been interesting as well that you see attacks now that they are looking at doing a lot more peels, and you see transfers come back in now, and that's definitely something which I've really enjoyed since rugby got back after COVID last year, about a year ago, when Super Rugby came back in Aotearoa, and I'm not sure if I ever pronounced that correctly, but certainly in Australia as well, the Super Rugby Australia and Super Rugby Aotearoa, that you saw a lot more peels, which I think was really interesting. So I've really enjoyed that side of things. Kind of exploiting teams because they're set up to defend them all, but we can exploit them either the front or the back, so I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, no, that's something I'm in favour of as well, because I like to see more open running rugby and, sort of a bit more creativity than just packs of forwards just smashing into each other all the time. I think most folk would agree with that. But with regards to the throwing, obviously, sort of the last 20 years or so, I think in my memory anyway, I think Rafael Ibanez is probably the last thrower who still throwed one-handed when the game turned professional, or just after it turned professional, I should say, up until he retired. But sort of what's your general consensus between the one-handed throw and the throwing we've seen in the last 20 years was two-handed?
Yeah, I learned as a one-handed thrower back, but now I played a lot of cricket when I was younger, so I was used to throwing a cricket ball one-handed, and or that type of baseball type throw, and even just messing around the back garden with my brothers or with the lads somewhere, just with a rugby ball, you'd be throwing one-handed, be that kind of quarterback throw you'd see in the NFL. And so I was never a hooker in school, and then my first game throwing, I think I threw when I was 17 in the game, and then it was just one game, and I was actually playing prop in the game, so I could always throw, but I would have learned it through, probably I was one-handed probably initially. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it just became a bit of a thing. I don't know what teams started doing it first, but I remember even watching the likes of Keith Wood and Terry Kingston when they played for Ireland back in the day. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to get the Scottish hooker. Was it Kenny Millen? Kenny Millen? Yeah, back in the day. I can't remember exactly what his throw was like, but I think everyone was kind of one-handed at that stage in the 90s. And I think you're right, Ibanez was one of the last. I have seen one or two since, and actually one or two not that long ago, that were one-handers, but there's very, very few of them.
Yeah.
I think it's like anything. I think with a technical skill like throwing, whatever you're most comfortable doing is important, and whatever you can do that's going to perform under pressure. So mm-hmm. one of the interesting things that I find about throwing, I wish I had a ball with me here actually. I usually do have one lurking around somewhere. But the interesting things is that, in terms of setup position, people thought, for hookers you have to be really, back here, so the opposition don't know when you're going to throw. And even when I do that now, I feel my shoulder pinching. I'm not even. I've got no load in my hand. There's no ball in my hand. Or any weight. So I think, I think it's really all dependent on what makes you what you're comfortable with. Now that said, you don't want to be starting with the ball here and then coming all the way back. Obviously, that could be quite big. But even at that, there's people who throw it that in the throw game at the moment. Yeah. So I think that's an interesting thing that I think you don't have to be, feet perfectly square. You might be a split stance, you might throw it a step. You don't have to start with the ball all the way back here, but if you can do it, that's great. I mean, like, obviously it does increase your chances, but if you look at a lot of the defensive teams, the really good defensive teams these days, they don't even watch the hooker. They actually, some do at different times, at different stages, and they're watching the man, so they're not really watching the ball anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think so. One-handers, you might see one. I'm sure we're going to see someone at some stage who can throw the ball one-handed. So look, if you can do it and you can perform it under pressure, that's great. The two-handed does give you a bit more stability, and that's probably tidied up the throw, I think, with that two-handed throw, because a lot of people wouldn't have the grip strength or the big enough hands to be able to grip it with one hand. So, and to get that really tight spiral that you need. And I think back in the day, maybe when you're more likely to get away with a crooked throw, you probably wouldn't be as likely to get away with a crooked throw now. So that two-handed throw is probably what makes more people more comfortable at getting that tight spiral.
Yeah. I mean, I just want to like back a little bit on what you said about, how teams are more focused on. I think that's at the highest level because they generally expect the throwers, because they're so good at that level, just to, be accurate at the very least 9 out of 10, 10 of the time. But I think it's also like, sort of something that is a skill that's maybe not, I mean, I don't see it as talked about as much, just how the appreciation of how it is to actually throw a ball like that. Because me personally, when I've tried it, I do well to make the 5 meter mark. So, I mean, I was never a hooker, obviously, but you know what I mean with that.
Yeah, but no, look, I'd be biased, obviously. So back, not to digress too much, but I went back to study a master's in strength and conditioning about 10 years ago. Actually, it was 10 years ago. I was distance learning, and I always wanted a sport qualification. I'd done a lot of strength and conditioning before that. I didn't want to be an S&C coach at that stage, but I wanted a sport qualification, do something that that I was kind of interested in, and just kind of add to my skill set. And I was working full time at the time and coaching rugby, and I ended up falling into skill acquisition and skill development, which is probably the smallest aspect of the course in terms of content. Yeah. And then within that, then I did my dissertation on throwing, actually. So I did my line of dissertation on skill development and throwing, which I didn't even do like an exercise that was I didn't use like a gym-based exercise like a lot of people did, like Olympic weightlifting, like the clean and jerk or the snatch or deadlifts, or even just other aspects to do with S&C. So, which is great because it kind of was more relevant to me as a coach. So it was great that I was given that flexibility, because obviously it was all relevant because it was the process of how you coach and educate. So I'm really into it, the throwing, and I think I think there's a massive shortfall in good coaching and around that, and it can go into a huge amount of detail. And I kind of attribute it to golf, or very similar to golf, that we can give loads of detail. And it's kind of touching on what I said as well about the different types of techniques, whether it be a one-handed or different types of stances, and you can get really, really detailed, and obviously the beauty of the coaching is knowing what to say and when to say it, and what to try and what not to try, and give all this information at once. And that's, I suppose, that's kind of going into a different kind of different areas in terms of the coaching process. But yeah, I definitely feel it's an undercoached, underappreciated skill. I'd be biased because I obviously I have that appreciation for it, but then I also look at it. Well, look, I love kicking, and I was always a decent kicker. I never shown how to. Well, actually, sorry, that's not true. Ollie Campbell I was very fortunate to do some kicking with him when I was a kid.
Oh, that's cool.
But he's a bit of a legend in that. He was an Old Belvedere man, and Old Belvedere was my first club. And
he's at Ireland fly half in the 80s, wasn't he?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So he's an Irish legend, and we did a bit of kicking back in the day. But I mean, I was only 9 or 10 at the time, so like I can't exactly remember what he told me. So I pretty much just practiced myself, and it was like throwing, just practice myself. And I think with kicking, kicking for a match-winning kick, obviously there's a lot of pressure with that. And obviously for conversions, you have people trying to sprint and block you down, but how often do you see that? So with throwing, I think that's the hardest skill in the game, because you have so many different things going on. You've got different people. You've obviously got the elements, the conditions, but you've got another team that's trying to steal the ball off you, and then you've got to make sure that your own team, certainly lower down the level, well, maybe you might be as well drilled a team. So you might be relying on your props to make sure you get the lift right, or the jumper to get his jump right. Guys remembering the calls, guys making the right calls. So I think it's certainly maybe lower down levels, and at the higher levels, I think it's a really important skill. And yeah, I don't think it's practiced enough. I don't think it's coached enough. So.
Yeah, I think that's maybe like with the way the game's generally talked about. I think, mate, I can't speak for all coaches, of course, but maybe like sort of the hires up, like in the media, like when you're watching a game and it commentary, something they don't talk about the sort of the artistry of it and what it entails, and like the technique, of course, as I'm saying. But yeah, I think the hookers. You can argue somewhat of an underappreciated position as well in the scrums, because you find referees are generally just focusing on what the props are doing and just how much pressure goes through the hooker and how much the hooker has to take on board. Because I never played that position, but I have experience of being in a training session with a scrum and still you feel it in the back of your neck, even though it's just sort of one-on-one sort of practice in that department. So it's a position that I think is really could be appreciated a lot more. Something I think your average fan maybe doesn't appreciate so much, but folk who are a bit more into the game and look at the details, coaches, etc., would appreciate it a lot more.
No, I think that's a really good point, Kyle. I think it's a really difficult position, I think, and finding someone who can scrum, like hookers that can throw and scrum. And it's not to say, by the way, that you have to be the hooker to throw. I think a lot of, maybe that's the other thing, that maybe coaches doesn't always have to be the thrower, or sorry, the hooker doesn't always have to be the thrower, but more often than obviously it is. But yeah, I think it's the scrummaging bit's a really good, really interesting challenge, and you don't see too many. Well, I think the last really successful convert that I can think of from the back row, or from actually Tom Young's, was the center, wasn't he? I think he was a 12 or 13, and he ended up converting and became obviously an international hooker.
Stuart McAnally was similar in Scotland. He started as centre, went to the back row, and then he went to the front row.
Yeah, and I think look, you think you're still going to see those guys occasionally do that, but I have a real appreciation for people like Stuart McAnally and Tom Youngs that can do that at a late stage. Like, it's different doing it, certainly when we coached. And funny, I was talking to a guy this morning about this, and we would have done a lot of work on the Leinster player development side of things, and you get guys who are playing Leinster under 18s and 19s, and you would look to maybe convert guys there, potentially under 17 to 18, getting ready to play in their kind of the interprovincial 18 series. And you were always looking at guys who maybe might be very good back row center, but the chances of him, obviously it's player development in mind. So you're thinking, well, is this guy going to play for Leinster as a centre? Probably not, but he might make it as a hooker or a prop or wherever. So you're always looking for those guys you could turn into props and hookers because of their body shape or their body profile and the family genes. And if they're more like, I remember we had a sorry, again, I'm going off on a tangent here, but we had a guy called Vak Abdeladze. He's a tie-head prop for Leinster, and he's been out of the game for a year. He's a young prop, and his he was a centre actually, and he was a centre. He was brought in at under 16. He stayed there for the year, and then he didn't quite progress through to the 17 stage when they kind of moved the numbers down. And then he had a really good season. He went back and he worked on his work-ons, and trained really hard. He came back in, and then at the start of the summer program, so they generally play the games at the end of the summer. We said, look, we're thinking about making you a prop, and we kind of explained it to him. And his dad was probably his biggest fan. He was at every single training session, but one of the reasons was his profile. That the dad played for Georgia, and he was a huge man. You couldn't, lovely fella actually, and we couldn't miss him because he was such a huge fella. He said, well, look, the chances of this guy turning out like a dad are pretty high, so maybe he's probably better off being in the front row. So I think you're always looking for those guys that can maybe play hooker, prop. I think those specialist positions are really difficult. So yeah, sorry, a bit of a tangent there.
No, that's fine. You just kind of brought into my mind when I was listening, because I was listening to a podcast with Warren Gatland the other day, actually, when James Haskell did a podcast with him, and there's one bit where like Warren Gatland talked about his playing career, and then he said, like, because he was a back row in his early days, and he volunteered to go into the front row because he didn't think he was quick enough. And James Haskell just went to him like, "You're volunteered to be a hooker. What's wrong with you?"
Yeah.
Just so it's like, yeah,
it's funny though, like, because I would have like come through some of the age grade setups when I was younger, and the kind of the specialist training that you're kind of doing, and you you know, when I got to playing club rugby and adult rugby, I struggled in like when I was scrummaging my back. Like I would have had probably would have had that really kind of curved back again, because nobody showed you what a good body shape looks like. They kind of showed you, but invariably you know, you could have your neck twisted and your back twisted, and you know, you're trying to maintain a straight back, but it was never, you know, like it is now. It was a long way off than it is now, you know. And so people would say to you, God, you know, I hate the front row. And like, when I look back on it, I do. Back at that stage, but if I was playing now, I think it'd be a bit different. But like I think we find that people who were in that love it, you know. So I think that's, you know, I think you have to be a certain kind of person to kind of really love the front row. And then there was other people that said, "Oh, geez, I hate scrummaging," and you know, they just love the other parts of the game, but that was the only position they could play, you know. So I think most people that do end up in the second row or the tight five, you know, they grow to love it if they don't love it already, because it's, you know, it's a real competition and contest and a real challenge, and it's it's really enjoyable part of the game for me. Like I always said, I wish mauling and scrummaging were nearly sports on their own, you know, because of the different you know, or Olympic sports. I used to joke actually that I wish they were Olympic sports on their own right, because they're great contests of technique and strength.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. I was just going to say, like, if you know, really enjoy the physical side of things, then I mean, I think I can fully get where you'd get the thrill of just like wanting to start just more or less smash into people, and like whether it within the laws and good technique, of course. But it's the scrums as well. Like, you know, how they've probably come on leaps and bounds since the days you played, I imagine.
They have, like, like I think
whether for the better or worse, I think can be.
I think it's safer now. I think it's definitely better. When I look at, like, certainly I probably still have back problems and neck problems now, and hip problems from when I scrummed, and that was back in the day when you had a like a crouch, pause, engage, and it was a real, like, it was all about winning the hit.
Yeah.
And the game is still about the hit to a degree. If you get yourself in a really good position on the engagement, then you're probably going to come out on top. So what a lot of teams do now is they're really putting a lot of weight and pressure on the opposition team. It's who can take the most pressure in that, when they're in that balance. Or that bind phase of the call or sequence. So they're really like piling on the weights. They can kind of get as much of an impact and hit as possible. So I think scrums now are brilliant. I'm really enjoying the contests at scrum time and line out time. The only thing at the scrum is it does get really, really messy and dirty, or not dirty, but difficult to referee, and it is a real mess at times. It's a real, I think that's a real challenge to kind of fix it up. So I think maybe speeding up the process and maybe more free kicks maybe, but then then there's other challenges to that too. So I think scrum penalties that cost you games, I think I can't remember the last time. I can't think of a scenario recently where that's happened, but I think that's a real, you know, those scenarios I think are really difficult. I think if for referees, most referees don't know what's going on.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. No
offense.
No. I was gonna say, I'll be honest, I totally relate to that, because you're looking at like 50 different things. I mean, one of the things that doesn't seem to get noticed as much, which by law should still be happening, is back rowers should be keeping their binds on the second row. But you still, because the referees are so focused on what the front rows are doing, you see so often these days back rowers just sort of subtly going off, so it's like they're more or less, their hand is only on their second row. I know other things like that, but I mean, I think it's part of a problem with the modern game is there's too much focus on what's going on before the ball's going in, when the real contest should be happening afterwards with regards to the physicality. Because I mean, it's still technically by law with obviously the crouch bind set, and then they're meant to keep their positions, and then the ball goes in, and then although whether it's a hooking contest nowadays, that can be dubious at times, to say the least. Whether the ball goes in straight nowadays can be dubious at times. I mean, it really should be after the ball has gone in that the sort of power comes on. But I think there's maybe a bit too much focus on what's before, and that's part of the problem. Just the way I see it, anyway.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I definitely think I think it'd be really interesting if referees really clamp down on the straight feed. I think that would make scrums a lot more. That might make scrums more entertaining. I think you've heard probably a few people talk in the last couple of years about, once a scrum has been awarded, then there's 30 seconds or something, or putting a clock on it. That I think that's a good idea. I like that. I'd like that aspect, but I think if it was really adjudicated, and then it kind of brings into question about really making the hooker position even more specialist, because I certainly wouldn't be able to hook a ball that was perfectly straight. I'd be really under pressure mobility wise. I think that then brings back the old, a bit of the artistry of the strike, brings it more into it. I was a heel striker anyway, so I had my technique down that I actually got a really good strike on the heel, whereas some people like to really scoop it back almost with your studs, and that never really kind of suited me. I didn't have the flexibility for it. That's probably why. But I kind of worked on what I was good at. So, I kind of wonder would it maybe potentially make that more of a specialist position and an initially work on.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing with we say with the hookers. It has gone more from that kind of athletic ability to hook the ball back in your side, because technically it is supposed to be when the ball goes in a hooking contest between. Although I know the laws have now changed now that any front rower from any team, if it goes in, can it just needs one. It just needs one. It just needs one of them now to hook it back towards their side, and then it's carry on. But yeah, I mean, because obviously a lot more of the game's gone the more power routes. I mean, hookers are generally seen as more an extra in that regard. And if, again, the athleticism, as you say, if there's too much focus on the hooking, then does the power go with that? In terms of the focus.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I think I'd be interested to see what they do with it. I think they have to do something with it. But I mean, as a contest, I love the contest. But I think it's too untidy for the game at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think because obviously, I chat with plenty of folk, maybe not as into rugby as I am, and they sort of like turn off when it's scrum time, and or when we could obviously like see each other, of course, like sort of, and they go somewhere else, and then it's like comebacks, like, oh, is the scrum still going on? So I mean, I think exactly. 30 seconds rule and a bit more focus from teams on make it and on the contest after the ball goes in, because I still think there's too much, like especially with props trying to get one over each other before, just to and so I think that's something that maybe could be looked at more. But I mean, how much are World Rugby doing? I think they're probably looking at it all the time.
Yeah, well, I think one of the best appointments they've kind of made recently is obviously Joe Schmidt's appointment in his role. He's I can't remember his exact title. It might be high performance manager or director, or not. It might even be something else, to be honest with you. But it's with the views. One of the is the. I suppose I think there's kind of three strands to it, but one of them is working with the referees and the game and the laws and all that. And I think he's certainly one that I think we'll probably see his impact in the next couple of years. Kind of to make the game better. And certainly the breakdown is a big area for him in terms of making that safer and making referees better equipped to referee the breakdown. And I think that'll probably in time with the scrum too. So yeah.
I mean, we could go into the breakdown a bit now. Just the way that is. Again, like I think it's a bit easier for referees now that obviously we all know the Rockgate thing from a couple of years ago in Italy. I understand like it's a bit easier now that all players have to be on their own side after a tackle occurs. Just generally also, I mean, I have some of my, I'm not, because technically by law, like with the holding on penalty especially, it's only should be if the player on the ground is holding on and the jackler, sort of can't get the ball because they're holding on. That's by law anyway, but you still see so many jacklers nowadays, they just go on and just to go and put their hands on the ball. They don't look like they're clearly trying to pull it up as much as they should do, I think. Do you think that as well? Or?
Yeah, I agree. I think that's definitely one thing. I also think that a lot of poachers aren't supporting their own body weight. And that maybe they hit the ground, their hands or elbows hit the ground first before they go for the ball. So yeah, I think I probably have more of a bee in my bonnet about the tackler not releasing, or rolling away, not rolling away, or rolling into the way.
Yeah.
So I think the breakdown would be a lot tighter if the tackler was looked at in that respect.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do, and I do, but I do think the poetry. I think you're right. I think I'd like to see him more, going for the ball, and I think obviously supporting their own body weight too, which is really like it's such a, you might have 300 rucks in a game or more. Well, you might have less obviously as well, but I mean, could be a lot of rucks in the game, and that's where I suppose being a referee, I think at that level is it's a real challenge, and even at the club level on your own when you don't have assistant referees, I think it's a real challenge. I think to make that decision, get that decision right every single time. It's just not going to happen. Like so.
Yeah.
It's a really different. I think being a referee is a difficult job.
Oh yeah. I mean, as Nigel Owens said, you don't go through any one game you referee and not make a single mistake. And sort of, I mean, because the level I do, obviously, sort of don't have TMOs, don't have, sort of don't have flags going in. We have like touch judges, of course, but they're, I mean, in most cases, because obviously don't have the resources of the higher levels, in most cases they're people from the clubs that are, then they're more or less just there to officiate where the ball goes into touch.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's I mean, I think like more mistakes obviously happen at the level I do, but yeah, you say about the tackle, I think that is kind of a problem, like especially since the sort of discouraged rucking, I'll say, sort of rucking where so your feet can go in, you can clear a player out that way, because I think that's the sort of less fear of players getting on the wrong side. The sort of also the way some people tackle as well. There's sort of clearly an aim to slow the ball down a bit for the opposition, but trying to make it look like, oh, ref, I've just made the tackle, I've not interfered at all, and then that's on the referee's decision if they deem that they've not rolled away properly, or if they can't get out of the way, then
yeah.
Do you know where I'm coming from there?
No, I think that's there's obviously a lot of what's the word, gamesmanship with things like that. I think when it comes to playing the referee and trying to make it look like you're doing something when obviously they know exactly what you're doing. So I think I'd like to see kind of more referee, or the other one as well that you see is the attacking team trying to push the pin the tackler in. Make it look like I think that's.
Oh yeah, no, I see that a lot, especially at the breakdowns where it happens. Like people are pulling the jerseys in to try and get out of the way, and referees just don't seem to do anything about it. And it's like, if they're not contesting in the breakdown, it's illegal, and you shouldn't be pulling them in. So I mean, I see that. I see that going on quite a lot actually. So
it'd be interesting. I think it'd be interesting to see kind of what happens now next year. I know they're obviously trying they were due to try a few different experimental laws in the Rainbow Cup, which is a bit of a shambles now. But I think what I heard this morning, 2 Rainbow Cups, like one in each country, which again just makes a bit of a mockery of it. But I think they're obviously trialing those new laws. I think, but none of them. I don't know how many of them are. There's nothing really around the breakdown that's different. I think so. Be a while yet before we see something. What they do for next season.
Yeah, I mean, I'm personally not in favour of the red card law, because I think if someone commits such a serious offence, then it should be enforced how serious it is by that team having a reduced player or players for the rest of the match. I mean, if it's like 20 minutes, player just commit offence, then they can 20 minutes later just replace them. But with regards to the dropout, though, I'm a bit so on, because I think that's going down a bit too much the rugby league route, and there could be things open to interpretation as to what counts as a kick through. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I'd like to see it more before I kind of make my full judgment on it. I do. I probably have a bit of that same fear. Is it making it a bit more like rugby league? But what I like about it though is that it does encourage a bit more attacking kicking, and I think that's really one thing I've kind of enjoyed in the game in the last year and a half. Okay, the idealist in me, and I want to see the ball in hand as much as possible. I want to see beautiful running rugby and great running rugby and loads of tries and all that, and I think that's great. But I think having a go kicking game is important as well. And I'm not saying you kick the letter off the ball just because because just hoof it up the field. But I think attacking kicks I think are a great part of the game inside that 22, and I think it's a great way to break defenses down
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
So I think if you're not going to be penalized as much and that you get the ball back, I think more teams are potentially going to try that, which in as a result then keeps teams on their toes from a defensive perspective. So I think that's interesting. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how it kind of manifests in the next kind of couple of weeks.
Yeah. I mean, I'm personally not really foreseeing so much tactical kicking, but I understand these days with defenses being so good and the vast majority of them now just blitz up. They're all, especially at the highest level, they're all after you straight away, and it's becoming harder and harder to break defenses down at will by just chucking the ball around.
Yeah.
So I understand why there's more tactical kicking in terms of trying to get in behind and create create that way, or to gain field position.
Yeah.
But I mean, so it's also, I don't like seeing a lot of the sort of kick tennis, especially what we saw in the autumn cup, where it's just like, sort of just kicking it back and forth. And, I remember seeing that about 10 years ago. And I thought like there were laws introduced to encourage teams to try and keep the ball in hand more, where the laws changed to try and focus more on the tackler rather than the carrier. But yeah. I mean, it seems to be a lot more kick tennis in recent times coming back. And again, I'm not personally for it, whilst I understand obviously tactical kicking and getting percentages of that can be important.
I think I mean this stats kind of shown around now again, kind of going back in stats, but like, if you kick the ball, you're more likely to win.
Eddie Jones is saying.
Yeah, and look, there's probably an element in that. So everyone's kind of copying England because South Africa, because they kick the ball. England kicked the ball more against New Zealand than when they played them. South Africa kicked the ball more against Wales, I think. I think they both kicked the ball 36 times, or it was actually very, very little difference, I think, between both teams. But and then South Africa kicked the ball more against England in the World Cup final. But obviously England had a lot of success, so everyone's going to copy England to a degree in that respect. And obviously Eddie Jones comes out and says that. So I think there's probably an element of teams have been kicking the ball more because they think that's what they have to do, and maybe less around why they're kicking it. And I think one of the things that made England really successful was some of those kicks that they, like, certainly against Ireland, they played 3 games against Ireland in a row, or the three in a row that they played between 2019 Six Nations, the warm-up game in the Six Nations, and then last year's Six Nations 2020. Like, I thought their kicking game in those games was superb, and they really they killed us with their kicking game, and it really exploited there. So I think they've shown some great parts of it, but there was a lot of, it wasn't aimless. There was a purpose to it, whereas I don't know if the purpose or the aim is always there, so.
But yeah, also the thing is with England's kicking game as well, as you're saying, also get the tactical kicking. I think it got to the point where they just lacked imagination with it because they just relied on it so much. Yep. And then it was showing up in this past Six Nations, which the purist in me, not just the Scottish anti-English, which I'm sure you probably have some feelings of as well, being Irish, but I'm
actually not too bad. I'm a bit more liberal than some might contend.
No, don't get me wrong. I'm not. Yeah, I'm not. Obviously, I think it's just a natural anti-English thing. I don't hate English people. I've got plenty of English friends, but yeah,
it's good to beat them though. It's good to beat them on the pitch.
Yeah. But I mean,
it's good rivalries.
Yeah. But I mean, as I was saying, like, so just the kind of kicking game, and again, as I said, the purist in me, because I want to see more running rugby, kind of liked that they got shown up a bit for that. So that's
but then I thought it was great though that, like, they played some brilliant rugby against Wales, I thought, at times, and and then the French game was a cracking game. So, like, obviously against Ireland, then they came a bit unstuck. But I like. Look, I think I mean Eddie Jones. I'd be a huge fan of his. Like, and I know obviously there's a lot of a lot of disgruntled English fans because of, as you said there, like maybe some aimless kicking and have things gone stale. But it's really interesting that all the players have kind of come out and backed him. So I think sorry.
No, I was just saying, that's the thing is with Eddie Jones. Like, I think he will, because the thing is he isn't stupid, as much as some of the stuff he says in press conferences is there to be provocative, and you can take that like any way you want, really. But he isn't a stupid guy. He is a smart enough guy with his rugby coach, and I think he will know from this past Six Nations. He he's got to change things up. He can't just be relying on the same old game plan or a lot of the same old faces to a point again. He's got to look to form more in future, because he just, with his past Six Nations, he just relied on reputation with the vast majority of them. So
yeah, he was probably a little bit unlucky in that respect. I think if they had beaten Scotland, and I thought Scotland were brilliant in that first Six Nations game, yeah, I thought that was they were the better team by far on the day, and I think maybe they kind of come in a bit cold with some of those Saracens players, but I mean all those Saracens players are bloody good players. Like, and you can, like, if I was picking a Lions team, I'd probably still have most of them all going, to be honest with you. So I think, yeah, they'll obviously get more rugby under their belt. And look, it's hard to be sustain that level of success too. Like, so I think a different environment, playing for the Lions, for example, and the next Sunday you all play for England, which I'm sure I've no doubt they will. They'll be better for it. Like, so I think, I'd be a bit more. I don't want to say pragmatic or practical. Not practical, maybe that's not the right word, but certainly I'd be a lot more just. You can't. It's hard to you're gonna have peaks and troughs in everything you do, and I think it's good to have a trough now. You want to be peaking in 2023, so which I'm sure there will be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm fully expecting the next 2 Six Nations, at least, for them to be I'm not saying they're going to win it, but I think they'll be competitive for the title again. So
yeah,
I mean,
I'd agree. Yeah.
I think also just probably finish up just the game in general for rugby union. Where do you think it's at, and where do you think it is going to be going forward? I mean, I understand obviously with the current pandemic's going to play a big part in a lot of the more business side of it, but what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's unknown really. I think look, I think I think socially, not to get too political or anything like that, but I think I think from a social perspective, I think people want to see sport and want to get out and see other people and have a drink and meet up with old friends and watch the rugby, and I hope, because of the pandemic, that that I think there'd be an element of even when people are allowed to do that there'll be an element of fear there and just tread water for a bit, and which I'll be interested to see kind of what, like, socially what kind of happens in terms of people, the return to sport and return to watching sport, I should say, in person. But I hope it kind of comes back soon enough, because I do think people need it. I think youth sport people kind of need it. So I think, I think the game is in pretty good shape in some respects. I think there's obviously things you can tidy up. But the game, you look at the sevens game is still growing really well. The women's game is growing really well. I think that there's probably an element of worrying about concussions and what does that look like. But look, it kind of rears its head every now and again in terms of, is the game safe enough, and what are the long-term implications potentially. And certainly there's a whenever concussion does come up, there's always a mention of was a doctor here who walked away, who left. It was an Irish doctor, and he was actually Brian O'Driscoll's uncle, and he left World Rugby at the time, or the IRB as it was. I'm not sure if it was World Rugby or IRB at the time, but World Rugby basically, and he wasn't happy with this, the protocols they have in place, like this HIA system, and he left his role there in that respect because of that. So yeah, I think that's always going to be contentious, but I do think certainly at the higher levels that the guys are pretty well looked after. I wonder, is that going to change the whole HIA thing in time? But certainly I think the game is pretty safe at the younger levels, because if there's any sort of doubt, those players have been taken off the pitch. I think that's really, really important. So, like, from a safety perspective, lower down and getting into the game, I think that's pretty good. I mean, I'm sure it could always be better. I think certainly I can only speak from an Irish perspective, but I think the RFE are really good and proactive at building awareness around that, and I think that's really important. And in that respect, I wouldn't have any problem if my two daughters wanted to play rugby. They can do whatever they want in terms of if it's sport or non-sport. So I think the game is in pretty good shape. I think we're coming through a good phase now in terms of attacking rugby, and teams really looking at how to break down defenses. So I'm really looking forward to the next 2 years and how the game evolves into the 2023 World Cup. So I think it's in a pretty good position. It could definitely tidy up a few areas of the game. Hopefully the pandemic doesn't hurt the game too much, because obviously it has. And a lot of teams are probably struggling financially, and players too, and look, they obviously put their bodies on the line, so you want to make, they need to be looked after in that respect. So I am, look, I mean, I've always loved the game, so I don't see that's going to change no matter where it's at. So I think it's a pretty good position.
Yeah. I mean, I say same here. I mean, I think there is, with the concussion thing, like I said, I've fully taken on board all the safety aspects of it, but I'd also, I think there does need to be a bit of balance there with regards to understanding that rugby is obviously a contact sport. There's always going to be that element of risk, and you can't sort of guarantee that there's not going to be occasions where players do get bangs to the head and that. I mean, obviously there's always ways you can reduce it, and as we've both alluded to, but it's just going to have to at some point just accept that there's always going to be an element of risk. That's what I'm meaning.
Yeah.
But I mean, overall, I think sort of making points there, and hopefully, like I said, I'd like to see more, especially at the higher level, the game sped up a bit more and more focus on sort of fast running rugby. So there's a few tweaks there I'd make, and maybe obviously as we've talked about the line out, I'd like to see referees focus on the gap a bit more there.
Yeah.
And at the scrums, which are still generally a mess, maybe speed them up a bit, and look to get teams focusing more on what's happening before, after the ball goes in rather than before.
Yeah.
Again, that also comes down to refereeing as well to a point. I'd say not that anyone will ever get it perfect, but I think that's something that more philosophy that I'd hope we'll have going forward. But no.
Yeah. I was just going to say on that. Sorry to interrupt you, but I was just going to say one thing I probably could throw in there is that actually I'd love to see more ambition and more of a mindset to try and keep the ball alive and offloading the game. And I kind of get the sense you would be quite similar because, as you say, you mentioned kind of being a purist of the game and attacking rugby. And actually, so one of the things as you mentioned at the start, so I've obviously a real appreciation for the line out, and I love where the line out's at the moment. I'm really interested to see where it's going to go to, because I think certainly the Six Nations I really enjoyed. I was doing a webinar. I did a webinar to kind of review the first 2 rounds of the Six Nations, and every team was different. I really enjoyed that aspect. Even even that Scottish performance against England in the line out, I thought Scotland's line out was excellent that day, and obviously did a bad day against Ireland, which can happen. The French I thought were really good against Italy, and then they had a bad day against Ireland. But what sort of stuff they were trying to do, I thought was quite interesting. So I love where the lineout's at, and I'm really interested to see where that's going. But I think the offloading bit is really. I was saying this in a coaching course I was doing last week that I do a lot of coaching courses for all levels, and I'd love to see that in the game, coached more in the game. I think that's definitely one thing where teams, even though I don't know if you caught the Irish-French game, the women's game in the Six Nations last weekend, and I put up a video there actually 2 days ago, and I just thought it was an unbelievable try. Okay, France were well up at that stage, but I just thought the offloading, the decision, they were looking for offloads and didn't give it on 2 occasions in the sequence, in the build-up, and then there was a sequence where they gave a lovely 2-handed offload and a 1-handed offload, and I just think it's the mindset and the ambition of teams. I'd like to see more of it. Which is very difficult when you are playing, for example, in the Premiership or in the top 14, when there's promotion, there's relegation at stake, and there's a lot of money at stake. But I think that'll be the purist in me. I'd love to see maybe that evolve a bit more.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I like to see good offloading in rugby as well. But a quick point on the Gallagher Premiership, as you say, with the promotion relegation, that's going to be, I think, abolished up until 2023, 2025. Is
that right? Yeah, I haven't heard that. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I think it's after this season. I think they're putting 2 more teams in. Again, there's others who are maybe a bit more well versed in that than I. But I mean, I think that's the way they're going. So
yeah,
it might be more of an incentive to just give it a go a bit more in terms of being a result.
Definitely.
In terms of being a results-based business, that might be in some areas. Again, whether you think this is, I don't think is always a good thing, but some areas might be put to the side just a little bit. But because they don't have to worry about relegation. But
yeah,
but I mean, but also you see some of the effects with the Pro 14, where obviously there's no promotion relegation. Maybe there's some teams who are just so the Zebra, for example, so far down in terms of quality compared to a lot of the rest of the teams. So
and they actually try to play. I haven't watched them as much now in the last 2 seasons. I probably should, because Michael Bradley is an Irish coach. He's coaching him. So, I've seen them play a few times, but they actually try to play really good rugby at times, So they're obviously not as strong or as good as they don't have as much depth as the other teams, but they actually do try to play good rugby. I think some of the Italian teams, but I think you're right. I think that's definitely a factor. The no promotion relegation is more conducive to teams wanting to play a bit more rugby, and I think that's what's been great to see with the in the top 14, when you see Toulouse and La Rochelle are high up, and Racing, they're, I think, are they 1, 2, 3? I think at the moment. And they all play great rugby, and which is interesting to see for a couple of years that the French league was great to watch, and it was very, very collision based. And look, the game is always going to be collision based, but there's definitely a lot more willingness, I think, to move the ball, which is good to see, encouraging to see. And I think the Premiership actually at one stage in the year, and I haven't watched it now as much in the last couple of weeks, but early in the season, I thought there was some great ambition shown. Maybe that was just after COVID, and that's kind of died off. But yeah, I think generally the Premiership doesn't tend to be as, depending on what you get kicks from. You get your kicks from physicality, collisions, and lineouts and mauls, which obviously I do at times. But then I think I also want to see the ball moved. So be interesting to see if that comes to pass, like you said, that'd be really interesting to see.
Yeah, absolutely. I stand corrected. Actually, it's Treviso, Benetton, Treviso, who are more of the strugglers of the Italian teams than the Zebra. But again, that's probably a thing on Italian rugby. It's itself. It's like there's a lot, areas where they're lagging behind compared to a lot of the other tier 1 nations. But yeah, no, absolutely. I'm hoping, like I said, we can keep seeing a game that's moving forward for the positive. And thank you very much for coming on, Peter. It's been great chatting to you. I'll leave a link link to your channel below. And again, thanks a lot, and good luck with all you do on Lineout Lab and your online coaching courses. And
thank you, Colin. That's been great to chat. Good to meet you, and look forward to chatting again.
Yeah, absolutely. And keep going with the videos, and take care of yourself. And thanks for coming on.
Yeah, cheers.
All right, take care.
Thanks, mate.
Right.